I always thought my roommate, Daniel, was the kind of guy who could never surprise me. We'd been living together for almost 2 years, and I knew his habits like clockwork. When he got home from work, how he took his coffee, even the way he'd hum quietly when he cooked. He was predictable, safe, or at least that's what I believed. It was a Wednesday night in late summer, the kind of night where the city outside felt almost too still. I'd been lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, unable to sleep. Daniel had gone out earlier with friends, and I'd heard him come in about an hour ago, his laugh echoing through the thin walls before his bedroom door shut. I figured that was it for the night, but at around 1:30 a.m. I heard his door open again. At first I thought he was heading to the kitchen, but the footsteps stopped right outside my room. There was a soft knock. "You awake?" His voice was low. I hesitated. Yeah, what's up?" The door opened a crack, light from the hallway spilling across my floor. Daniel leaned against the frame, wearing an old t-shirt and sweats, his hair messy in that way that somehow made him look younger. "Can't sleep," he said simply, like that explained everything. I sat up a little. "Okay, and?" He gave a small shrug. "Mind if I hang in here for a bit?" It wasn't the first time he'd come into my room late at night, but usually it was after too many drinks or when something was bothering him. I told myself this was just one of those times. "Sure," I said, shifting over so he could sit on the edge of the bed. But he didn't. Instead, he walked around and sat on the floor, leaning back against my bed frame. We talked about nothing, work stuff, random news, the kind of filler conversation you have when you're too tired to go deep but too restless to be alone. At some point, I realized my knee was brushing against his shoulder. I didn't move. It was nothing. Or, at least, that's what I told myself. We sat like that for a while, me on the bed, him on the floor, just letting the quiet settle between bursts of small talk. Every so often, Daniel would tilt his head back against the side of my bed to look up at me, his eyes catching the faint glow from my desk lamp. There was nothing obvious in his expression, but the longer it went on, the more I felt like something was different. "You ever notice," he said suddenly, "how weird it is that we've been living together this long and barely know each other's real shit?" I frowned. "We know plenty about each other." "Yeah, like what movies we like and what food we hate, but not the deep stuff," I smirked. "You mean like childhood trauma and exes?" He chuckled, low and warm. "Something like that," I shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe we just never asked." He didn't say anything right away, just reached over and grabbed the hoodie I had hanging on the bedpost, playing with the cuff absent-mindedly. It was such a casual move, but his hand lingered near my knee longer than necessary before he set it down. "You dating anyone right now?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "Not really." His gaze stayed on me. "Why not?" I let out a dry laugh. "Because my life's a mess and I'm not exactly relationship material right now?" "Bullshit," he said quietly, like he'd been waiting to call me out. "You're just picky." I was about to fire back when I noticed the way he was looking at me. Not the usual friendly Daniel look. This was something heavier, steadier, like he was testing my reaction. "Maybe I am," I admitted, softer than I meant to. That's when he smiled. Not his usual lopsided grin, but something smaller, almost private. "I think that's a good thing," he said, and then he shifted, leaning back on his hand so that he was angled toward me instead of the wall. The space between us suddenly felt smaller. Daniel stayed in that angled position, one knee bent, his arms stretched out behind him to prop himself up. From my spot on the bed, I could see the shape of his shoulders under that thin t-shirt, the fabric pulling tight across his back when he shifted. It was ridiculous that I even noticed, but I did. "You're staring," he said without looking at me. I blinked, caught. "No, I'm not," he smirked. "Yeah, you are." The words weren't sharp. There was no teasing bite to them. They landed softly, like he was inviting me to admit it. I leaned back on my palms, exhaling slowly. "Maybe I was just trying to figure you out." "Good luck with that," he murmured. Then he pushed himself up off the floor and climbed onto the bed without asking. sitting cross-legged a foot away from me. We didn't say anything for a moment. The quiet wasn't awkward anymore. It was thick, like both of us were waiting for something to happen. You ever think about... He started, then stopped, like he was weighing whether to finish the sentence. About what? I asked. He met my eyes, holding them longer than he should have. Never mind. I tilted my head. No, say it. His jaw flexed, like he was trying not to grin. You ever think about how different it'd be if we weren't just roommates? I felt my pulse in my throat. Different how? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he shifted closer, his knee bumping mine. I don't know, just different. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I could smell his cologne faintly. Something clean, warm, and familiar. My mind was telling me to keep it light, to joke my way out of this, but my body wasn't listening. Daniel, I started, but he interrupted. You're overthinking again, he said quietly, his gaze flicking to my mouth for the briefest moment before coming back to my eyes. And that was when I realized he wasn't playing around. That brief glance at my mouth stuck in my head like a hook. I couldn't look away from him, even though my brain was still scrambling for something to say that would break whatever this was turning into. But Daniel didn't seem to want it broken. He leaned in, not enough to close the gap, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off him. His voice dropped low. You're thinking too much, he said, his eyes steady on mine. I swallowed. Maybe I have a reason to. He gave a slow smile, one corner of his mouth lifting. Or maybe you're looking for one. Before I could respond, he reached past me, like he was going for something on my nightstand. But his arm brushed against my chest, and instead of pulling away immediately, he let his hand rest there for just a moment, his fingers grazing the fabric of my t-shirt. It was nothing and everything at the same time. You're acting weird. I managed, though my voice came out quieter than I intended. Daniel tilted his head, still close. Weird how? I shook my head, but I didn't move back. You know how. For a second, it looked like he might laugh it off. But instead, his expression softened, almost hesitant. I don't usually do this, he admitted. My heart was beating too fast. Do what? He leaned back just enough to study me, his eyes searching mine for something. Permission, maybe. Then he said, barely above a whisper, this. And before I could ask what he meant, his hand slid down my arm, slow and deliberate, until his fingers were resting lightly against mine. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't even really an embrace. But it was the first moment where neither of us could pretend we didn't know what was happening. Daniel's fingers stayed against mine, still and warm, like he was waiting for me to be the one to move first. I didn't. Not because I didn't want to. If anything, I wanted too much. But because I didn't trust myself to stop once I did. You're quiet, he murmured. So are you, I replied. He smirked faintly. Guess we're both thinking the same thing then. My chest tightened. And what's that? That we probably shouldn't be doing this, he said, but he didn't let go of my hand. In fact, his thumb started brushing slow circles against my skin like he was contradicting his own words on purpose. The tension was unbearable. Too much eye contact, too little space. And then he shifted closer, his thigh pressing against mine. This doesn't feel like something we can walk back from, I said quietly. Daniel tilted his head, eyes locked on mine. Maybe I don't want to walk back. That was it. That was the crack in the dam. I didn't even realize I'd reached for him until my hand was on the side of his neck, my fingers brushing the short hair at his nape. He didn't flinch. If anything, he leaned into the touch, his eyes fluttering shut for half a second. When he opened them again, there was nothing hesitant in his gaze. You sure? He asked. I nodded, though my voice came out rough. Yeah. The air between us felt electric, like we were teetering on the edge of something we couldn't name yet but both understood. And then, Slowly, he started to close the gap. Daniel's face was close enough now that I could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way the lamplight caught in his eyes. My brain felt scrambled, like every normal thought had been replaced with an almost physical awareness of how little space was left between us. He didn't rush it. If anything, the slowness made it worse. My pulse was pounding in my ears, my body already leaning forward before I realized I was doing it. His hand, still resting against mine, shifted upward until his palm was against my forearm. It was such a small movement, but I felt it everywhere. "You're really not gonna stop me," he said, his voice so low I almost missed it. "Do you want me to?" I asked. He shook his head, just barely. "No." The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of traffic outside and the sound of our breathing. He was close enough now that I could feel each exhale on my skin, warm and steady. I didn't know which one of us closed the last inch, maybe we both did, but suddenly his forehead brushed mine. We stayed there, not kissing yet, just waiting. I thought he'd make the first move, but when he didn't, I found myself breaking first, leaning in that fraction more until my lips barely grazed his. It was nothing more than a ghost of a touch, but it lit up every nerve in my body like a live wire. He made a low sound in his throat, one I'd never heard from him before, and then his hand was at the back of my neck, pulling me in for real. The kiss was slow at first, deliberate, almost cautious, like he was learning the shape of it, testing the waters. But it didn't stay cautious for long. When he tilted his head and deepened it, the heat between us spiked. My hands, almost on instinct, found their way to his waist, fingers brushing the hem of his shirt. His breathing changed, quicker now, and the sound of it was almost as disarming as the kiss itself. When we finally pulled back, it wasn't because either of us wanted to, it was because we needed air. He rested his forehead against mine again, both of us catching our breath. "Well," he said, his voice rough, "guess we crossed that line." I let out a shaky laugh. "Yeah, I think so." He didn't move away though. If anything, his thumb traced a lazy line along my jaw before he spoke again. "You know this isn't just a one-time thing now, right?" I met his eyes. "Yeah, I figured." We sat there in silence for another few seconds, the weight of what just happened settling over us. But underneath that heaviness, there was something else, a kind of certainty that, no matter what came next, neither of us was going to pretend this didn't happen. And for the first time all night, the thought didn't scare me. Daniel didn't move right away. His forehead stayed resting against mine, his breathing still uneven, and I could feel his fingers flex slightly at the back of my neck like he was grounding himself. The closeness felt strangely natural, like we'd done this before, even though we both knew we hadn't. Finally, he pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes scanning my face. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, my voice low but steady. "You?" He smirked faintly, though it didn't quite hide the seriousness in his gaze. "Better than okay." That answer sent a ripple of heat through me, but I tried to play it cool. "So what happens now?" "Now?" He sat back slightly, but his hand slid down to my arm, his thumb brushing along my skin in a slow, absent motion. "Now, we stop pretending." I didn't realize how much those words hit me until they did. The truth was, there had always been something. A flicker here and there, in the way we'd look at each other too long, in the stupid jokes that sometimes landed heavier than they should have. I just never thought either of us would acknowledge it. And yet here we were, sitting too close on my bed in the middle of the night, both knowing there was no going back. He must have seen something in my face because his smirk softened into a small, almost shy smile. "You've thought about this before." It wasn't a question. I considered denying it, but there didn't seem much point anymore. "Yeah," I admitted. He hummed like he'd been expecting that answer, then leaned in again. Not rushing, not trying to turn it into something reckless, just a gentle press of his lips to mine. This one was softer than the first, slower, like he was memorizing the shape of it. When we broke apart, his eyes stayed locked on mine. "I didn't plan this," he said quietly. "Neither did I replied. "Guess it doesn't matter now." A silence settled over us again, but it wasn't awkward. It felt heavy, in a way that made my chest tighten. He shifted closer until our knees were pressed together, and I could feel the warmth of him radiating through the thin fabric of our clothes. "You're letting me stay here tonight, right?" he asked, his tone lighter now, almost teasing. I raised an eyebrow. "Is that a question or a statement?" "Both," he said with a grin, already stretching out so that half his body was on my bed. I sighed, but I didn't push him away. Instead, I shifted to make room, and before I realized it, he was lying beside me, one arm draped casually, too casually, across my stomach. The lamp was still on, casting everything in that dim golden light that made the room feel smaller, safer. His breathing started to slow, his body relaxing against mine, but I couldn't sleep. Not when my mind was replaying every second of what had just happened and wondering how much further it might go. Daniel lay there like he belonged, his arm draped across me, his head angled toward mine so close I could feel the subtle tick of his breath against my shoulder. The longer we stayed like that, the less it felt like some impulsive, middle-of-the-night thing, and the more it felt like we'd just stepped into something we'd both been circling for a long time. I kept telling myself I should be the one to shift, to make it less intimate, but my body had other plans. I stayed still, hyper-aware of the weight of his arm, the slow rhythm of his breathing, the faint scent of whatever clean, warm cologne always lingered on his skin. "You're not sleeping," he murmured. I glanced at him. "Neither are you." He smiled against the side of my neck, a barely there curve of his lips that sent a shiver running down my spine. "Maybe I don't want to yet." The tone of his voice was low, unhurried, but it had that edge, like he was testing how far he could go without me stopping him. His fingers shifted slightly where they rested on my stomach, tracing an idle pattern through the thin fabric of my shirt. "Daniel," I warned, though my voice wasn't as steady as I wanted it to be. "What?" he asked, all faux innocence, but his hand kept moving, brushing just enough for my muscles to tense under his touch. "You nervous?" "Not nervous," I said slowly. "Just figuring out what this is." He turned his head so he could see me better, his expression softer now. "It's me finally doing something I've wanted to do for a while." That admission hung in the air, heavier than I expected. I studied his face, looking for any hint that he was joking, but there wasn't one. His eyes stayed locked on mine, steady, certain. I didn't answer right away, mostly because I didn't trust what might come out of my mouth. Instead, I reached up and pushed my fingers lightly through his hair. It was something I'd never done before, but it felt natural, like my hand had been waiting for that moment without me realizing it. He exhaled quietly, almost like a sigh of relief, and his arm tightened around me. "You have no idea how hard it's been not to do that," he murmured. "Guess we're both bad at hiding things." I replied, my hand still resting against the back of his head. He grinned faintly, then shifted closer, his body aligning with mine until there was no space left. The move wasn't rough or demanding. It was slow, deliberate, but it carried the weight of a choice neither of us seemed willing to take back. We stayed like that, the silence thick between us, and I realized something. This wasn't going to fade away by morning. Whatever happened next, we'd already crossed the point where we could pretend it didn't mean anything. And somehow, I didn't want to pretend anymore. Daniel's weight against me felt different now, less casual, more intentional. His arm was still across my stomach, but his fingers weren't still anymore. They traced slow, thoughtful lines, just enough pressure that I could feel the shape of each movement through the thin cotton of my shirt. It was maddening in the quiet. "You're really not gonna push me away," he said softly, like he already knew the answer. I turned my head on the pillow to look at him. "Do you want me to?" His eyes searched mine for a moment before he shook his head. "Not even a little." We just stayed there, staring at each other, the air between us charged in a way that felt impossible to ignore. I could see the way his chest rose and fell, the way his lips parted like he was on the verge of saying something but thought better of it. And then, without warning, he shifted, rolling slightly so that his body hovered over mine, his weight supported on one elbow. It was a move that could have been playful, if not for the way he was looking at me, his gaze locked and unblinking. "Daniel." My voice came out quieter than I meant it to. He didn't break eye contact. "You know you can tell me to stop." I know, I said, and the fact that I hadn't told him to stop yet was all the answer he needed. His free hand came up to the side of my face, his thumb brushing just under my cheekbone. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant, like he was memorizing the feel of me before crossing a line we both knew he wanted to cross. "You have no idea how long I've thought about this," he said, his voice low, almost rough. "Then maybe you should stop thinking," I replied, my pulse loud in my ears. That broke the last sliver of restraint between us. He leaned down and kissed me, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. His hands slid into my hair, holding me there like he was afraid I might pull away, and I kissed him back without hesitation. It deepened quickly, less about testing the waters now, and more about finally giving in. His body pressed fully against mine, the heat of him seeping through every inch of contact. My hands found his back, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer like I could make up for all the nights we'd skirted around this without saying a word. When we finally broke for air, our foreheads stayed pressed together, both of us breathing hard. "Still sure you're not nervous?" he asked, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. I smiled faintly. "Pretty sure." He shifted again, settling back down beside me, but keeping an arm tight around my waist, like he had no intention of letting go. And in that moment, lying there with him in the dim light, I knew the truth. This wasn't a one-night thing, and it wasn't an accident. Whatever we'd just started, it was going to change everything. The quiet between us was heavy now. Not awkward, not hesitant, but thick with the kind of anticipation that made every breath feel deliberate. Daniel's arm was still firm around my waist, his thumb tracing absent patterns against my side like he didn't even realize he was doing it. "You're still thinking," he murmured against my temple. I smiled faintly. "So are you." "Yeah," he admitted, "but I'm also trying really hard not to." That was all the warning I got before his lips were on mine again, deeper and hungrier than before. The change in pace hit me hard. No more testing the waters. No more cautious hovering. His hands slid up my side, fingers brushing the edge of my ribs, pulling me closer until there wasn't a breath of space left between us. I felt my own hands moving before I thought about it, one gripping the back of his neck, the other sliding along his back until I found the heat of skin under his shirt. He inhaled sharply at the contact, the sound caught somewhere between surprise and approval. "You're dangerous," he muttered against my mouth. "How's that?" I asked, my voice low. "You make it too easy to forget we're supposed to be, I don't know, sensible about this." His smile was quick, fleeting, replaced by the kind of look that told me he'd already decided we weren't going to be sensible tonight. The kisses turned rougher, messier, our breathing quickening to match. His thigh shifted between mine, pressing in a way that made my pulse spike. I felt his weight settle more fully over me, the warmth of him sinking into every point of contact, and any thought of pulling back just dissolved. My shirt was the first casualty. He broke the kiss only long enough to tug it over my head, his eyes flicking down over me in a way that was both appreciative and almost careful, like he didn't want to miss a single detail. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice lower now, almost a rumble. "Yeah," I said, no hesitation in it. That was all he needed. His mouth found mine again, his hands mapping my sides, my back, the curve of my shoulder. Every touch felt deliberate, like he was claiming new territory, and the heat between us was sharp enough now that it was hard to breathe evenly. When my hand slipped under his shirt, he caught my wrist for half a second, not to stop me, but to steady himself. Then he pulled it off in one motion, tossing it aside before lowering himself back down until our skin met fully for the first time. The contact made both of us inhale sharply, the sheer intimacy of it almost dizzying. The rest happened in a blur. Clothes discarded without ceremony, the space between us completely gone. Every movement was slow enough to be deliberate, but urgent enough to carry the weight of months, maybe years, of unspoken tension finally breaking loose. And when it finally happened, when the last line between us was crossed, it didn't feel awkward or rushed or like some reckless mistake. It felt inevitable, like we'd both known in some quiet corner of our minds that we were always headed here. After, we stayed tangled together, the air cooling against our skin, the rhythm of his breathing slowing against my neck. He didn't let go, not even when I shifted to get more comfortable. "This is gonna make mornings interesting," I said into the quiet. He huffed a soft laugh. "Yeah, but I'm okay with that." I smiled in the dark, my hand resting on his back. "Me too." Neither of us said anything else after that. We didn't need to, because whatever happened next, we both knew the truth. There was no going back.